everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review for Thor issue 23. And this was an epic conclusion to the God of Hammer story arc. I've really been happy with how this creative team has pretty much been handling their story arcs so far. This just works very well, and it comes at the right time because the next issue will be the legacy numbering of the 750th issue of Thor, and I can't wait to see how that works out because I've been enjoying this so far. And this issue begins actually with kind of like a kind of flashback as we see kind of a younger kind of thing, younger kind of Thor being taught by Odin how to wield Mjolnir, which is actually pretty cool because it's not a completely different art style, but it kind of fits because it shows the different kind of time frame as Thor's younger and trying to get the feel for Mjolnir, and he's like trying to find the balance of it while Odin's like, hey, the hammer won't hurt you, boy, as we see that eventually, as we're at the story now, the hammer has hurt him greatly. And Odin, of course, makes a remark that this hammer will be the death of him, as we've learned. And Thor's asking why the hammer is heavier for Odin than it is for him. He's like, actually, I mean, that hammer has a mind of its own, and there's like, we're not here to pry apart the secrets of the universe. You'll do that when you're a king. As he's then able to get Thor to utilize the hammer, talking about how it was made and how sometimes in the heat of battle he's able to hear the souls of the dwarves that were fused within Mjolnir with the creation of the hammer. And he's able to catch it, and he congratulates Thor on catching that and keeping his eyes open with it. And Thor's kind of freaked out a little bit. He's like, will that happen to me one day? Will it take my soul? He's like, no, you'll go to Valhalla, and that'll be, the universe will pretty much be dead before that happens. And he's like, but what about you? Of me? Like, can he die? And he's like, no, son, none of us can, not really. In death, I will become what I've always been, a legend. And that's a grandiose way to put it, but it's always that kind of thing that, like, death is just another kind of part of life, that next kind of journey and everything. But we get this awesome splash page of Odin Force Thor taking on Mangog and Mjolnir. And we see that Mjolnir's like, calling him a daddy's boy and everything like that. And so, like, his name was Odin. And I'm like, I never really saw Thor as a daddy's boy. Granted, he would have some certain similarities with Odin, but I would always peg him more for, like, a mama's boy, if anything. And even then, I don't really consider that an insult to him because he's able to do and think of things that his father normally wouldn't. So we see that he pretty much breaks his sword that has been pretty much infused with power, and he asks Sif through, of course, the Ravens to get him another weapon. And Sif's like, listen, you can't keep using the Odin Force like that, otherwise you're going to go into the All-Sleep. You got to watch out what you're doing. And he's like, all right, I relieve you of your sword. And she's like, very well. She sends it, and he, of course, then does something that normally Odin wouldn't. He thanks her and says that he'll promise to get it back, as he then utilizes the Bifrost to capture and restrain them. And you can't cage lightning. It's like, yeah, can't I? You're a powerful storm, but you're a storm nonetheless, and I'm still your god. And then he takes the hammer back. He's like, yeah, this is mine. And Mjolnir's kind of freaking out about that she can't be separated from the hammer. And Thor can tell that she's scared. And he can feel it. And he says that that's good, as he then utilizes the Bifrost to take them away. And she's wondering where they're at. And he's like, this is Nidavellir. This is a forge. This is where you're born, and this is where you're going to die. As he then ignites the forge, and he then starts being like, hey, can you feel that? It's a heat of 1 billion suns, and that he's going to unravel everything that his father did with that, and he's going to unmake Mjolnir. That's his whole thing. As she's freaking out and tries to hit him with the hammer, as he stops it, and he's like, you can't hurt me. And it's funny because she hurt him to a certain extent, but now he's like, listen, you can't hurt me. As we then see Thor in the process of destroying Mjolnir. As we see, pretty much talking about like how it can be heard across the galaxy, child made God made king, and you can hear the echoes and shakes of Nidavellir as everything as he's destroying the last remnants of his father's legacy. It's like, yeah, he's kind of undoing this kind of great thing as Mjolnir is shattered, and Thor then falls asleep from everything that he's done, which is, he then wakes up 4 months later. And it's great that everything worked out pretty well, because we see Freya, Loki, and Angela there, and he thought he heard him, because we see a bubble saying, "Keep your eyes open, boy." It's like, interesting. We'll have to see how that works out. And they're all pretty much trying to get him to take it easy. And I get that. I would be doing the same thing as well, but I also understand Thor's point of view of, he did this great monumental thing, and then he went to sleep, and it's still fresh for him. They've had time to kind of process and everything, and he still needs to do that. He's like, I've rested long enough, and everything's been taken care of. There wasn't a body, so they'll hold a ceremony, so there's no rush. And we see, at first, Thor's kind of like, got a kind of bad face on, but then he's like, you're right, of course, as he's still in the thing of processing. Loki's actually being a good brother and be like, listen, I know this is hard, and they're like trying to help him, as well as Freya. He's like, I don't need anything. And I'm like, listen, we lost him too. This isn't a loss that's just affected you, Thor. It's affected the realms. And he's like, I know, and they need him as well to help them. And that's important to kind of be able to acknowledge it. And he's like, I just need to, and Angela, like, this is ridiculous. I know what he needs. Meet me in the armory. And Thor's like, what? And we see that they fixed Mjolnir, but there's nothing magical about it at this point. Like, Angela's like, yeah, it took all the angels in heaven. We're not dwarves, but we did what we could. And Thor's like, I don't know what to say. Why would you? And she's like, listen, I told you I'd clean up your mess, and I did. And she's like, you know, it's just a hammer. He knows he can't feel any magic from it. But she's like, I think that depends upon who wields it, don't you? As we see Thor smiling at that remark. And I do agree with Angela and Thor as well, because there's certain things in everyday life that you could have just like a little pencil or whatnot, and you're writing, and sometimes you just write something and it works out. It almost takes on a magical quality because of just what you've done, because of what you thought or what you said as you wrote it and everything. Like, I kind of like that little kind of thing. It's a little line, and I don't know if it's supposed to have that much meaning to it, but that is true, because sometimes you'd have this piano or this some kind of other object that is just a normal object, but you get a person that's able to gel with that object, and they create something or they do something that other people can't do. And that's a magic of its own, even though we are talking about the realms of magic and gods and dwarves and elves and everything, where that kind of stuff is commonplace. You kind of have to think a little bit differently. And Thor keeps trying to thank her, but of course she kind of Batmans out of there, and we see him thinking to lift it up and then praying to his father, saying that, like, he's just so lost and he can't see the path. And that makes sense. I mean, granted, even though it's been 4 months, this is the first time that he's able to kind of like process the loss of Odin and what it means to kind of chart his own path. Now, granted, he was charting his own path as being the king of Asgard. However, he still had his father there to be able to be relied on as an advisor and to help out. But this time, Odin's kind of gone to what we think, but then we see Keep Your Eyes Open, Boy, and in a different kind of like speech bubble kind of color, and a king rules from can't rule from his knees, and he goes, Father, making it seem like Odin's spirit or soul is within Mjolnir, within this reforged Mjolnir. So that definitely sets up some interesting kind of possibilities and teases, and that it would be kind of different. Now, it's really weird because I saw like certain things relating to like the 750th issue, and like Odin was around there, and that Odin is going to be like important in like this Hulk versus Thor thing that's going to be going off as well. So we'll have to see how that kind of works out. But I liked this because it was a very kind of personal story for Thor, and that Odin has made mistakes throughout his life, and that has led to legacies that Thor has had to contend with, being the king of all the realms and being the king of Asgard. And we've seen him in this God of Hammers have to deal with that and actually physically unmake a thing that has been important to Thor's legacy and Odin's legacy because of what it has wrought and what it is doing. That was a kind of cool and kind of powerful moment because it's definitely able to bring all those kind of disparate things together to show, like, okay, this is, like, actually representing what Odin's done, but also being, like, a physical thing that Thor has to contend with and deal with, as he has to take on the powers and take on and actually forge himself into the king of Asgard in this way, which I like. That kind of story is at least what I've gotten through this for the God of Hammers, and I just think they were able to well execute it, and it just really hits. It's interesting to see that kind of dynamic and understand that kind of passing from parent to child and what that means to become an adult like that, because you've always got to contend with what comes before you and what you want to kind of leave after you. Now, granted, we haven't gotten to that point with Thor yet of what he would want to leave after for Asgard and the rest of the realms and his children. However, this is that nice kind of shifting point of, like, this is Thor needing to do this as the king of Asgard and what that kind of means and what that will entail, because he has been known as the one throwing around the hammers, and he still has it, but it's a completely different context now. There's no storm with it. He now has the Odin Force, which would now probably be called the Thor Force, and what that means and how he will have to change, because, granted, he is usually the warrior and the champion. But he will have to, as we see, figure out what kind of problems will he be able to best utilize his powers, because, granted, fighting off Mjolnir and Mangog using the full Odin Force power was definitely what he needed to do. But sometimes he's not going to be able to do that, because if he falls into an Odin sleep for too long, some other kind of force that would have been a better use of that Odin Force power that he had could have popped up while he's in an all sleep and lead the realm to ruin. So we'll have to see if he has to figure out how to do his own champion and kind of delegate that kind of stuff, because it is important to understand that as the king of Asgard, he's going to have to delegate that kind of stuff, even though he's been used to doing that kind of stuff his own. It'll be interesting to see if that kind of pops up, or what they'll kind of have to do with that. But those are the kind of things that I'm looking forward to in the next kind of like arcs, and to see kind of what explorations we'll have. I've really been loving this creative team and can't wait to see what else they'll be going on with further. And I'll be really sad when this creative team's over, but I'll always be looking forward to Thor's adventures, because they've been on a roll with creative teams with what they've been doing so far, and I've been really enjoying it. So those are my opinions on the issue. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also, like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.